Hey, everybody. This is Eric Hale. Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Trader. And I'm joined with my partner and friend today, Greg Jensen. Hey, Greg.
Good to be with you. Glad to be back from a wonderful trip out on the East Coast. Don't get me wrong. I loved the trip. It was amazing. Met some great new people, learned some fantastic, fascinating things. But it's still good to be back home. But yeah, let's jump into. We've missed recording because we've been on the road too. So
right.
Well, talking about things.
So the last recording we did was back after the Teton Economic Summit, which was fantastic. We got to talk to some pretty smart people around the world, some people from the Fed, and some business leaders and hedge fund managers, and just luminaries, the kind of people that you see on CNBC and Bloomberg regularly. Since then, I did RAGBRAI, which is the Registered Annual Great Bike Ride across America, across Iowa, and I did 522 days on my bike, and it was really brutal heat. It was in the high 90s. And then I got home. I was home for 2 days, and you and I got on planes. And your trip was a little more arduous than mine, but we go to northern Maine, where this is Grand Lake Stream, Maine, which is considered down east Maine. If you look at Maine, it has this little part that juts out to the east. And we were fishing. We could see Canada from where we're literally, that we say, hey, those trees are in Canada. So we're finishing up on the border of Canada at a pretty, I don't even know how to describe, I don't think adjectives describe the honor of being invited to Camp Kotok. You want to talk a little bit about what is Camp Kotok and what?
Yeah,
what's the origin?
Kotok. Yeah, Camp Kotok is a fascinating place. The origin, to be honest, obviously it's a conference that was created by David Kotok, who is the CEO and founder of Cumberland Advisors, and very well respected man in the wealth management arena. One of the most respected economists and advisors in the world. He's been on presidential advisory councils. He's served with multiple different Federal Reserve governors and assisted in the Federal Reserve process, and has an amazing amount of connections. And the foundation for the Camp Kotok really was it spurned out of the great financial crisis.
No, that's not. I don't know if you know the reason why Camp Kotok started. David was at World Trade Center.
Right. So maybe I don't know the backstory.
Yeah, no. What happened was he and a bunch of other economists, like John Sylvia and some of the other original founders, Stewart was there this year. We can't share all the names. So it's operated under Chatham House Rules, which is we can share what we learned in terms of themes, but we're not supposed to attribute who those came to. Now, some of those people have spoken publicly, and so we'll mention some names like Jim Bianco and Sam Rines, David Nadig and Barry Ritholtz, and some other people that put stuff out publicly. But they're like Federal Reserve members and other. In the past, I've seen central bankers from overseas as well that have been their active members. So we can't really share because it's a forum where people can share thoughts and ideas, because that's what Camp Kotok's all about. But the origin was that a bunch of economists got out of World Trade Center before it crashed, before it imploded, and they lost a lot of friends and started. David had a sort of calibration on the important things of life, and they decided, hey, every year let's get together as a group. So it was a bunch of economists that survived the World Trade Center on 9/11. Crash or implosion that happened with the planes hitting. So that tragedy led to the origin of Camp Kotok. The name Camp Kotok came because the first downgrade of U.S. debt was when Standard & Poor's downgraded in 2011. It just so happened that people from financial media were recording live from Camp Kotok, and what happened was everybody that CNBC and Bloomberg wanted to talk to was there at Camp Kotok. So, and it was Becky Quick who named it Camp. Right. It wasn't called Camp Kotok, but they were recording on the deck overlooking a lake, something like this. and just one chief economist or other leader, thought leader, was interviewed and presented, and it was Becky Quick said live from Camp Kotok. So that's where the name came from.
That's interesting. I didn't know about the actual start of it being, because I knew David was in the World Trade Center. I know,
Right.
I had a conversation with Michael Drury, who was there, and I know he's publicly talked about being there, so I can talk about his name. He also was there in New York City at the time, and I didn't know that was the foundation. Now I do know, having talked to David, that it was really on the back end of the great financial crisis that it really started to get its notoriety of being this gathering of very, very influential economists and policymakers surrounding the economic decisions and financial decisions for the macro, all arguably of the world, not just of the U.S. economy. And the interesting thing that one of my takeaways from Camp Kotok was, because it's operated under the Chatham House Rules that allows people to essentially operate in anonymity if they want to, it allows people to have more of a connection and not feel like they have to constantly be playing the political card, the worrisome, especially if it's a member of the Federal Reserve. As an example, as you mentioned, some have been there in the past. There's a former Federal Reserve representative there this year, and they don't have to put on that fear of, if I say something here, it could move the market. And so they can be a little more open. And I think what that allows for is to have a better discussion of what they truly do feel about the economy, some of their things that they may see impacting the economy, both for the positive and the negative. And it allows for, I believe, a very constructive conversation. And if you go into it with an open mind and not just a set and, well, I think we're in recession and this is why, I think you can take away from it an enormous amount of growth and perspective, because there are so many different representatives there. I mean, I met individual portfolio managers, met individuals who are really focused on technical analysis. A whole broad scope of the ETF industry was there. And then, like you said, central bankers and private wealth managers from, private offices outside of the United States. And so, yeah, it was a really fascinating discussion.
So to tag on to that and put things into perspective. So I think Dave Nottig did a really good video that he's put out, and, sort of what's the reason for Camp Kotok. And I encourage you to go do a Google search of Camp Kotok and watch some of the videos. David Kotok himself is putting out on Cumberland Advisors. He's the CEO of Cumberland Advisors. They're putting out some videos. He's got a video with Doug Duncan, who's the chief economist from Fannie Mae, talking about economy, and there's some other things there. But it's about conversations. And what is fantastic, you mentioned David Kotok. He is an absolutely incredible person. He is a collector of people. He builds relationships with, literally prime minister, presidential level people. If you name a politician, he's probably met with them, or a former president, he's met and spoke with them. The names that he has, and he is incredibly humble and a very, very intelligent person. But what he is doing is creating a group of people and then trying to create conversations without anybody coming in and dominating, saying this is the way it is. And so what's interesting on the timing, you mentioned in 2011, the Fitch down, or not, sorry, we're jumping ahead here, is the S&P 500 downgrade of U.S. debt. Ironically, last week, Fitch downgraded U.S. debt on the start of Camp Kotok. So we ended up having an impromptu panel on the first night to talk about it. And I got pulled in to speak on the panel on my perceptions and thoughts on the Fitch downgrade. And then other people shared as well. And there's a combination. It's about conversations with credible people in an environment that allows people, like you mentioned, to speak freely and openly. And I will say that I came away very aware of some things that I wasn't, sort of always wondered. And I can't attribute those things, because certainly under Chatham House rules, there's certain times when we say, okay, listen, everything here is on the record. It could be recorded, could go to the press. There's people from the press that are there in the past, Wall Street Journal, Fortune, Bloomberg, CNBC. This time there was a reporter from New York Times there. So there's very clear, this is on the record, this is off the record. And some of the most important things that I came away understanding with are things that I can't share because it was clearly off the record on some of these things. And then the other aspect of it is you get paired up with somebody in a canoe. We shared some of these, I don't know if I share some of the pictures of some of the people that are fishing there. Here's one that I can share because it's kind of benign. It doesn't show who it is. There's Jill Fornito, but this is a very well-known person too. Somebody you're probably going to see on CNBC. I'm not going to show these pictures down here. These are people playing poker. So without their permission, here's one that was on the record: Danielle DiMartino Booth, Kathy Bosjanek, and Leland Miller, who it's a really small event. 38 people are here, and from all sorts of aspects. And it is a very, you and I are both honored. I got invited because of you. You've known David for 10 years or longer, and he's asked you to go many times, and I stole your invitation 3 years ago. So this is my third time at Kotok, and I'm honored to be there. But part of what David tries to do is to bring a diverse set of thoughts and opinions in different perspectives, which is, we don't want everything lopsided, everything. And it's phenomenal to be part of those conversations. And then getting in the canoe, you're in a canoe with somebody for 4 to 6 hours, and it's just the two of you just talking and learning and exchanging ideas and thoughts. And it's it's pretty interesting. But I think what we wanted to try and do is to sort of get to some of the high level discussions that we can share that came away. We said we were going to try and keep this short because, let me skip to the chase. Some of the people that were there have been like, hey, we love your YouTube channel. Why don't you have us on? So like, for example, Jim Bianco actually approached me. He's like, when are you going to have me on your channel? So I expect that we'll get Jim Bianco on here soon, as well as some of the other people that we met with and we're able to share information and conversation. Hopefully we get them on here in the future. What are your thoughts on the key takeaways?
Well, and that's what I was going to say, is rather than maybe dive into these key takeaways, we'll just talk high level on some of the things that we'll probably be talking to a number of these people who have agreed to come onto our YouTube channel. So for some of our future recordings, we'll talk to Jim Bianco or Sam Rines or some of the other people who are there. Dave Nottig, as an example, that we already mentioned today. But some of the key themes, I would say,
David Kotok. How about that guy?
Yeah, David Kotok. I think David would come on and do it as well. So I think some of the things we'll talk about them that I took away, some of the high level themes are the idea of higher for longer, what that does to markets.
So what do you mean by higher for longer for the rest?
Higher for longer meaning interest rates, how long the Fed stays at their current level of their Fed funds rate. Not necessarily going much higher, but I was actually surprised at the general consensus of the group that what would you say? Maybe an average of 3 more hikes was the general consensus. At least 2. At least 2.
Well, I don't know how many hikes there's. There was one person who said it's going to take whatever it takes. How many hikes is kind of a hard question to ask because it's going to be data dependent. But I think the general consensus was that there will be more rate hikes, and whether that changes. And we had a good CPI print yesterday, but then PPI was hotter than expected. So if inflation's going the wrong way, And we got Daily came out yesterday saying that we're not the Fed's probably not done. The market, by the way, the tone, you got to be careful what you read, because the tone seems to be in the press is that the market's going to cut. In fact, actually, Nick Timmerose yesterday's piece after CPI was saying that he thought the Fed might be done. And he's been known as the Fed whisperer, so maybe he's right. But also one of the things that was pointed out is this gap between Fed meetings is the longest gap of the year. And there is a boat ton of economic information plus Jackson Hole.
Right?
So Jackson Hole is the Kansas City gets together and brings, this is a really big policy, some interesting history, how that all started. It was all getting Volcker to go fly fishing was how it started. But it's an annual meeting where central bankers from around the world come and talk. And we're expecting a speech that'll come from Chair Powell. And it could be nothing. Last year's was 7 minutes of fluff. There was actually nothing that came out of the speech. And Powell could choose to say nothing. He could choose to say something significant. But in the past, this
2 years ago was like,
right,
bam, we're fighting inflation. And that's what really started the decline.
It was.
Markets.
Yeah. So between these meetings, what could happen? I think all bets are off. Yesterday, the futures for a Fed rate hike dove. That was one of the topics that came up, is the fact that the futures are always showing that we're going to be cutting. And what was pointed out is I shared that some of that data is based on futures, which has very poor liquidity. So we're not really sure that those numbers are the right numbers, because there's not a lot of people who trade there. The other one, and this was pointed out by, I won't mention name, but that people are hedging. So just because somebody's hedging and buying insurance for a rate cut doesn't mean that they think one is happening. They're just buying insurance to protect themselves. Sometimes those sentiment do wag the tail wags the dog. But just because the numbers are going down and indicating that people are betting that way, that doesn't mean they're betting. It could be hedging themselves. So I don't know. I'm in the camp that we're probably going to see more rate hikes. I don't know how many. It'll be as many as it takes, I guess.
We're not doing a very good job of not going deep into some of these higher level themes. It's all right. So
I think people want to hear this.
Here's some of the other themes. So one key thing is not, there was a general feel of not what's wrong with the economy right now, but what could go wrong. In other words, things are actually pretty good right now.
It was literally the question. What is it that can, everything's going really well right now in the economy. What could break it? What could be the problem? Yeah. And it wasn't, the Ukraine war, it wasn't inflation. I mean, it was escalation, some new catastrophic event. It wasn't COVID. I mean, I think we have fully priced in and digested all of those things. I will say one of the ones that I did hear sort of a rumbling is the price of oil. Somebody that was there that has a lot of knowledge and understanding of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, used to run it, was there speaking, and the fact that it's empty. He actually gave a really good perspective that maybe this is, are we going to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve? It was built in 1970s. The type of oil, where the oil is, how we use it is different today. So maybe there's something there. But I think one of the consensus and fears is rising oil prices, which trickles down to everything else. That really can be a significant component to inflation, because it makes transportation more expensive and it makes all the commodities more expensive as well as oil prices go up.
Okay, I'm not pausing again because you keep going too deep. The difference between markets and valuations, yield curve inversion, the 2 and 10, the difference on how banks make their money, and the spread on the 10-year versus mortgage rates, or the 2-year in mortgage rates. That was an interesting conversation. The debt ceiling debacle.
Okay, let's pause on that one, because that one we're going to get David on to talk about it.
Yes.
Because David's brain operates at a different frequency than anybody else. And he understands markets. I mean, he's making the argument that anybody out there since the debt ceiling who has got a mortgage, got a car payment, you are paying more money due to that. We thought was just all political theater. There's papers published, and he's got a very thorough paper, which is publicly available. He's put it out there, that shows exactly how it's an estimate of $1 trillion over 10 years. So that money, that's the cost of the debt ceiling, that debacle that we had. Never mind what it did to our downgrading our debt, but it has an impact. And I don't think people know, like everybody listening to me, you are paying for what happened. So you're paying $63 a month higher than you otherwise would. That number sticks in my head, and I don't know where it came from, but you're paying $63 more a month because of what happened with that debacle. And that's every American. It also translates its way overseas as well. So, he said if Americans knew what that cost them, they would be livid, and people don't understand that. So I think we should get him to talk through that.
I definitely want to have him talk about that, as well as the cost of, just global debt and the impact that has on all of us, and whether that debt is just held at the the country level, at the government level, or whether that spills into all of the other debt that is out there as well, car loans, home loans, etc. I think we need to get Dave Nottig on to talk to us about AI. That was the other artificial intelligence and the impacts that that's going to have. And maybe we don't just limit this to just Dave, but I definitely want to dive into Dave's perspective on what he views artificial intelligence is going to do, what it's going to do to education, what it's going to do to the economy, and the growth models that this really could be a profound game changer going forward. And I know there's a lot of fear around AI about what jobs it's going to replace, but I think if we start to look at artificial intelligence and embracing it in the right way, it could be an absolute game changer in our productivity numbers, and creation of new jobs that we don't even know what they are right now. So there was a fascinating discussion on artificial intelligence one night, and I think Dave was probably at the center of that. I know he was part of that panel that had that discussion. So those are some of the key high-level themes. I think it would be fun to do invite some guests on and dive deeper into those over the next few weeks to a few months as we coordinate those schedules.
Yeah, the good news, I think the key takeaway. So for those of you that are listening and you're thinking, hey, look, that's Greg fishing. No, that's a picture there. I think, the sentiment definitely wasn't bearish on the market. Now, sometimes when everybody gets on one side, it goes the other. But we definitely came away. I don't think I'd say bullish. My personal sentiment, and I heard at least two people say that maybe we've seen the max move in stocks, but nobody seemed to be bearish on equities, for the rest of the year. So there was, and it all could change in a dime. But I think the sentiment for individual traders, and certainly I'm positioning my portfolio to be more positioned for stagnant from here on out. That's sort of my takeaway. I pivoted a little bit. I was a little more bullish before these two events, but following these two events, my sentiment now is more stagnant for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I'm agreeing. I'm in agreement with that. I'm still relatively bullish on certain sectors. I think the economy is doing fine right now, and I think certain sectors can continue to do well. I think industrials. I think people have margin right now that they haven't had in the past. I think oil is still a sector that makes sense second half of the year. I think semiconductors is probably one that's a little hot. I mean, come on, some of those stocks were up 100, 200% in the first 6 months of the year. It makes sense that they need to take a breather right now. So, the fact that NVIDIA's down and Micron's down and Qualcomm's down, AMD's down, I don't think that's something to necessarily say, oh, the move is dead, the bubble's popped. But man, it's just bringing earnings back into perspective that they maybe were a little ahead of themselves. So
you touched on something that another person who's a thought leader who was there, and you mentioned his name earlier, Sam Rines. Sam is the person who first detected this price over volume thing. And it's over a year ago that Sam was writing about it. And what's happening is, your bag of potato chips that is the same size bag, there's just less chips in it now. So this shrinkflation that we're seeing, he was the first person to see it. And now he's on price and margin, that companies are able to pass along higher prices and improve their margins. If you look at the last quarterly report, a less summary of S&P 500s, we're almost done with earnings season. It's amazing that that earnings have been revenue's down a little bit. Or let me just say, revenue beat, but not as much as it typically beats. But earnings is way above. Earnings, typically about 72% of companies beat on their earnings forecast. 79% so far this year have beat on their earnings. That was not the consensus coming into this earnings season. But what's happened is that companies have been able to pass along higher prices and better margins. And Sam is really on the forefront of that. He's somebody to keep an eye on, because whatever the next thing is, he's going to be on it before anybody else.
Well, it's good to be back with you. Good to be back home. It was fun to spend the week with you. I had an enjoyable time.
Heck yeah. It was interesting. I love that we both tried to avoid each other, though. Like you sat at a different table. We didn't fish together. I love being with you. And, I want to be with you sitting there. I wanted to be with you, but we got this room of just any place you sit, you're going to be learning something. So yeah, I'm glad that we got some separation, except for breakfast, right? We sat next to each other for breakfast a few times. And the days, by the way, start, 7 a.m. We're there at 7 a.m. for breakfast. We go fishing, you talk, you come back, you have lunch. There's some presentation and conversation over lunch. You fish again, and then you kind of freshen up a little bit. And then there's a big discussion before dinner. Then you have dinner, you discuss during dinner. Then there's a discussion after dinner. Then you go play poker until midnight. And then you do it all again, and again. So if you know why we're a little tired and glad to be back, that's why.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Greg.
We'll talk in the next one.
All right, everybody. See you.
Okay. See you, everybody.